An Amish man married an obese girl as a bet. On wedding night, she shocked him. The dusty church bell tolled, and the whole town gathered to laugh. They thought it was a cruel joke, a plain farmer, and the girl no man would claim. But when the vows were spoken, something no one expected began. Inside the lamplit cabin, silence broke, not with shame, but with a voice that could move mountains. She carried a secret that would shake the town. Land the railroad would kill to possess. From whispered ridicule to fire in the night, from hymns sung in a cabin to threats at the church door, this marriage born in mockery became the battleground for faith, dignity, and survival. What began as a bet turned into the fight of their lives. Will their vows be strong enough to withstand fire, betrayal, and the weight of the whole town's scorn, or will mercy and song be the only weapons left standing? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows down the dusty main street of the Colorado rail town. The year was 1878, and the street bustled with the usual mix of cowhands leading their horses, merchants arranging their storefronts, and gamblers lounging outside the saloon doors. Their lazy chatter mixed with the jangle of spurs and the creak of wagon wheels rolling past. Outside the weathered saloon, a group of railroad men gathered, their expensive suits and polished boots marking them as outsiders. They passed a bottle between them, growing louder with each sip, until something caught their attention. Across the street, a figure in plain dark clothes and a broad-brimmed hat stepped into Miller's general store. "Well, look what we have here," drawled the tallest agent, elbowing his companion. "It's that peculiar Amish fellow." Through the store window, they watched Daniel Lapp carefully selecting nails from a barrel, examining each one with methodical patience. His quiet presence and simple garments stood out sharply against the bustle of the frontier town. "Heard he bought land out by the creek," another agent said, scratching his chin. "Building himself a farm, they say. All alone out there with his plain ways and his prayers." Laughter rippled through the group. The tall agent stepped forward, raising his voice. "Say, friend, don't you get lonely out there? Or does the good Lord keep you warm at night?" Daniel continued sorting nails, his movements steady and unhurried. The railroad men sauntered across the street, emboldened by Daniel's silence and the whiskey in their blood. "Bet you ain't never had a proper wife," one called out. "Too peculiar for any woman to look twice at." The general store fell quiet. Even old Miller stopped arranging his shelves, watching the scene unfold with worried eyes. Daniel finally looked up, his face calm, but his jaw set firm. The tall agent's eyes gleamed with sudden malice. "I'll make you a wager, plain man. Marry Mia Yoda, you know, that big girl who lives out past the smithy. Do that, and we'll leave you be." A ripple of cruel laughter followed. Everyone in town knew Mia Yoda, the shy, heavy-set girl who inherited her uncle's land. She kept to herself mostly, hurrying through town with her eyes down, trying to avoid the whispers and stares that followed her. Daniel set down his nails with deliberate care. His voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. "A vow before God is no jest, friend. Marriage is sacred." "Sacred," the agent mocked. "Well, ain't you righteous? Reckon you're too good for the likes of her, anyway." The story spread through town like wildfire, carried on whispers and knowing looks. By late afternoon, it had reached the flour mill where Mia was collecting supplies for her mother's baking. She noticed how conversation stopped when she approached, how eyes slid away from her face. Finally, Sally Werner, the miller's wife, took pity. "Oh, Mia dear," she said softly, "have you heard what those terrible railroad men did?" Mia's heart sank as she listened. Her hands trembled as she gathered her flour sack, and tears blurred her vision as she hurried home. The weight of public humiliation, so familiar and yet always fresh, pressed down on her shoulders. The sun was setting when the church bell began to toll, its clear notes calling the faithful to evening prayer meeting. Mia sat in her usual back pew, trying to make herself small despite her size. She could feel the sideways glances, hear the whispered speculations. Reverend Thompson stood at his pulpit, clearing his throat for attention. His expression was troubled as he surveyed his congregation. "Brothers and sisters," he announced, "I have an unusual declaration to make. Tomorrow we will witness a wedding." He paused, and his eyes finding Mia in the back. "Daniel Lapp and Mia Yoder will be joined in holy matrimony." A collective gasp filled the church. Mia felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't even spoken to Daniel Lapp, had only seen him from afar, admiring his quiet dignity but never daring to approach. Now she was to be his wife? Was this some cruel joke? Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the rest of the service. As the congregation filed out into the gathering dusk, Mia remained frozen in her pew, her mind whirling with questions and fears. She didn't know whether to feel hopeful or terrified, whether this was an answer to her lonely prayers or just another form of public mockery. All she knew was that tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. Morning arrived with a palette of soft pinks and golds painting the Colorado sky. The small wooden church, perched at the edge of town, stood as a humble sentinel against the brightening horizon. By 8 o'clock, townsfolk streamed through its doors like ants to sugar, their Sunday best a splash of color against the weathered walls. The one-room sanctuary filled quickly. Merchants closed their shops early, and even the saloon emptied as curiosity drew people to witness what many considered a spectacle in the making. The railroad men who had started it all lounged near the back, exchanging knowing smirks and whispered jests. Mrs. Sarah Werner, the miller's kind-hearted wife, watched the door anxiously. "Poor Mia," she whispered to her husband, "to be married this way, with half the town here to gawk." As if summoned by her words, Mia Yoder appeared in the doorway, her widowed mother's arm linked protectively through hers. Mia wore a faded calico dress, its blue flowers washed soft with wear, but clean and pressed for the occasion. Her face was pale as fresh cream, and her hands trembled as they clutched a small bouquet of wild daisies. Whispers rustled through the pews like wind through prairie grass. "Did you hear about the bet? That Amish fellow cannot be serious." "Well, I never—" Mia's mother guided her to the front pew, her chin held high despite the murmurs. Mia kept her eyes fixed on the rough wooden floor, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. The church fell silent as Daniel Lapp entered. He wore his usual plain black coat and broad-brimmed hat, which he removed respectfully at the threshold. His steady footsteps echoed in the hushed sanctuary as he made his way forward. There was nothing of jest or mockery in his bearing, only calm purpose and dignity. When he reached Mia, Daniel bowed his head in greeting, as proper as any groom before his chosen bride. "Good morning, Miss Yoder," he said, his voice clear and kind. Mia lifted her eyes briefly, meeting his gentle gaze before looking down again. Her fingers twisted nervously in her skirts as they stood together before Reverend Thompson. The preacher cleared his throat, his expression troubled as he opened his Bible. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams as he began the ceremony. The familiar words of Scripture filled the small space, speaking of love, honor, and faithfulness. When the time came for vows, Daniel's voice rang out firm and true. "I take thee to wife." No hesitation, no hint of shame or reluctance colored his words. From his pocket he drew a simple brass ring, worn smooth with age. With gentle care, he slipped it onto Mia's trembling finger. The crowd shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the entertainment they had expected. Daniel's serious demeanor and reverent handling of the ceremony left no room for amusement. Mia's response came soft but clear. "I take thee to husband." Her voice gained strength as she spoke, drawing perhaps from Daniel's unwavering presence beside her. After the final prayer, the new couple turned to face their neighbors. The railroad men at the back wore confused frowns, their anticipated entertainment having transformed into something they didn't quite understand. "Reckon it won't last a week," one muttered as the congregation filed out into the bright morning air. Fools taking this mighty serious for a bet." Another replied, watching Daniel help Mia down the church steps. A wagon waited outside, its bed loaded with Mia's few possessions, a trunk of clothing, some kitchen implements, and a family quilt. Daniel assisted Mia onto the wooden seat with the same careful respect he had shown throughout the ceremony. He tucked a blanket around her skirts against the morning chill before climbing up beside her. As they pulled away from the church, the sun had begun its westward journey. Golden light spilled across the rolling hills, painting the landscape in warm autumn hues. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as they headed toward Daniel's rented homestead beyond the town limits. Mia sat straight and still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Every few minutes, she would steal a quick glance at her new husband. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his strong hands steady on the reins. His face remained serene, showing neither triumph nor regret for the vows he had taken. The town grew smaller behind them as they rolled toward their new life together. Mia's heart fluttered between fear and wonder, uncertain what awaited her at the end of this journey. Yet something about Daniel's quiet strength beside her offered an unexpected comfort, like a sturdy fence post in a storm-swept field. The wagon rattled along the dusty trail, climbing steadily toward Daniel's homestead. As they crested the final hill, his cabin came into view, a modest structure of rough-hewn logs with a small vegetable patch beside it. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, evidence of the banked fire he had left that morning. Daniel brought the wagon to a gentle stop and helped Mia down, his strong hands steady and respectful. She stood uncertainly, taking in her new home. The cabin looked solid enough, though small, with a single window and a door fashioned from sturdy planks. "It ain't much," Daniel said softly, "but it's dry and warm." Mia nodded, her throat too tight for words. The silence of the countryside pressed in around her, so different from the constant bustle of town. No clatter of wagon wheels, no shouting merchants, no whispered mockery following her steps, just the rustle of autumn leaves and a distant meadowlark's song. Daniel carried her trunk inside while Mia lingered at the threshold, twisting her hands in her skirts. The brass ring on her finger caught the late afternoon light, still foreign and strange against her skin. When Daniel returned to the wagon for more of her things, she finally gathered her courage and stepped inside. The cabin's interior was plain but tidy. An iron cookstove stood against one wall, while a narrow bed with a straw tick mattress occupied the corner. A rough-hewn table with a single chair served as both dining space and work surface. Everything was neat and ordered, speaking to Daniel's careful nature. He came in behind her, arms full of her possessions, and set them gently by the wall. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair. "Sit and rest. You must be tired from the day's events." Mia perched awkwardly on the chair's edge, feeling large and out of place in the small space. Daniel moved about with quiet efficiency, lighting the oil lamp as dusk gathered outside. The warm glow softened the cabin's stark interior, casting friendly shadows on the log walls. He filled a kettle with water and set it on the stove, then took dried herbs from a tin on the shelf. "My mother's recipe," he explained, measuring the leaves carefully. "Good for settling the spirit." The familiar routine of making tea seemed to ease some of the tension between them. Soon, the cabin filled with the soothing scent of mint and chamomile. Daniel served the tea in tin cups, apologizing for the plainness of the vessels. "Thank you," Mia whispered, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. Supper was simple, beans he had left simmering all day and fresh bread he had baked that morning. Daniel bowed his head in prayer before they ate, his words gentle and grateful. Though the meal was plain, his courteous manner and careful attention to her comfort helped calm Mia's jangled nerves. As night settled fully outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the cabin's chinks. Daniel banked the fire in the hearth and began arranging blankets and straw into a makeshift bed for himself on the floor. "The bed is yours," he said firmly when she started to protest. "I'll be comfortable enough here." Mia sat on the edge of the bed, watching him work. His kindness throughout the day had been so unexpected, so undeserved. She felt small and humbled by his quiet dignity, yet somehow safer than she had ever felt in town. Without conscious thought, she began to hum, soft at first, then stronger. It was an old hymn her mother had taught her, one about grace and shelter in times of storm. The melody filled the lamp-lit cabin, her clear voice lifting the words toward the rough-beamed ceiling. Daniel straightened slowly from his task, turning to face her. His eyes widened with wonder as her voice soared through the verse, pure and sweet as spring water. The song spoke of hope and comfort, and in that moment it transformed the humble cabin into something holy. When the last note faded, Daniel stood very still. That was... He paused, searching for words. That was beautiful, Mia. Truly beautiful. I had no idea you could sing like that. Mia ducked her head, unused to praise. I used to dream of teaching children to sing, she confessed in a whisper. But people laughed when I spoke of it, so I stopped dreaming. No gift from God should be hidden away. Daniel said softly, especially not one as fine as that. The awkward silence that had filled the cabin all evening had transformed into something different, a shared appreciation, a tentative understanding. They retired to their separate beds, but sleep was slow in coming. Mia lay awake, Daniel's words of praise echoing in her mind. Daniel, on his pallet by the hearth, found himself remembering the way her voice had touched something deep in his soul. In the darkness, they each pondered this unexpected turn of events, how a marriage born of a cruel bet had led to this moment of genuine discovery and respect. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in pale brush strokes of pink and gold. Frost glittered on the autumn grass, each blade wearing a crystal sheath that would melt with the rising sun. The sharp crack of an axe split the morning silence as Daniel worked steadily at the woodpile, his breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Inside the cabin, Mia stirred awake to the rhythmic sound of chopping. She had slept better than expected in the narrow bed, wrapped in clean quilts that smelled of sunshine and herbs. The familiar task of preparing breakfast gave her hands purpose, even as her mind whirled with the strangeness of her new life. She stirred the pot of beans hanging over the hearth, adding a pinch of salt and dried herbs she found on Daniel's neat shelf. The simple act felt like a declaration. This was her home now, her hearth to tend. Her fingers trembled slightly at the thought, but she steadied them with determination. Daniel entered, arms full of split wood, and nodded a quiet good morning. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning unfamiliar steps. He filled the water bucket while she set out tin plates, each trying to anticipate the other's needs without crossing paths too closely. After breakfast, Daniel led her to the small barn where a brown and white goat stood in her pen. This is Hannah, he said, his voice gentle. She gives good milk, when she's of a mind to. He demonstrated the milking technique, his strong hands moving with practiced ease. Mia watched intently, then tried herself. Her first attempts were clumsy, but the goat stood patient, and Daniel's quiet encouragement helped her find the right rhythm. Soon, fresh milk streamed into the bucket, and Mia felt a small surge of pride. While Daniel worked in the vegetable patch, Mia explored her new home more thoroughly. She found his work shirts, worn thin at the elbows, and brought out her sewing basket. Her large fingers, so often mocked in town, proved deft with needle and thread. By midday, she had mended 3 shirts with neat, sturdy stitches. The day passed in this way. Small tasks, careful movements, moments of shared work, punctuated by shy glances and tentative smiles. When evening drew near, Mia prepared a simple stew from the remaining beans and vegetables from the garden. They sat together at the rough-hewn table, the lamp casting warm light over their meal. "Thank you," Mia said softly, her eyes on her bowl, for not treating me like they do in town." The words came out in a rush, heavy with years of hurt. Daniel looked at her steadily across the table. "A vow is sacred," he said, his voice firm but kind. You are my wife." The plain words carried weight, like stones dropped in still water. Mia felt heat rise in her cheeks, caught between disbelief at her changed circumstances and a fragile hope she hardly dared acknowledge. After the dishes were cleared, Daniel surprised her by suggesting they step outside. The night air was sharp with coming winter, and the sky stretched vast and clear above the Rocky Mountains. Daniel pointed upward, tracing shapes among the stars. "There's the Big Dipper," he said, his arm steady as he outlined the constellation. "And there, see how those stars make a W shape? That's Cassiopeia." His voice held quiet wonder as he named the patterns written in starlight. Mia gazed upward, seeing beyond the boundaries that had always hemmed her in. The whispers, the mockery, the sidelong glances. Here, under the infinite sky, those limitations seemed to fall away. The stars sparkled like scattered diamonds on black velvet, indifferent to human judgments. As they stood in the starlight, Mia gathered her courage. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "there's something you should know." She paused, wrapping her shawl tighter against the chill. "My uncle left me land when he passed. A good tract, just outside town. It's mine free and clear, but—" She faltered, then continued in a near whisper. "Some men have been asking about it. I fear they want it for themselves." Daniel stood very still, absorbing this revelation. Their marriage, already unusual, now carried an additional weight he hadn't anticipated. Property brought complications, especially in this territory where land could make or break a man's fortunes. He understood now why some of the town's men had watched Mia with calculating eyes. The night seemed to grow still around them, as if the very air held its breath. The stars continued their cold glitter overhead, indifferent to the concerns of those beneath them, while the weight of this unspoken challenge settled between Daniel and Mia like an invisible presence. 2 days after their starlit conversation, the morning sun cast long shadows across the yard as Daniel hitched their old mule to the wagon. The wooden wheels creaked as he tested the harness one final time. Mia emerged from the cabin wearing her best dress, though her shoulders hunched slightly as if trying to make herself smaller. "Ready?" Daniel asked, offering his hand to help her up to the seat. Mia nodded, gripping his steady fingers as she climbed aboard. The wagon rocked gently beneath her weight, and she settled beside him, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. The thought of facing town again made her stomach twist, but they needed supplies. The mule plodded down the dusty road toward town, its hooves raising small clouds with each step. As they approached the main street, Mia felt the weight of stairs pressing against her like physical things. Women paused in their conversations to watch. Men lounged against storefronts, poorly hiding their smirks. "Look there," someone whispered loudly enough to carry. "The fat bride and her Amish fool." Daniel's expression remained serene as he guided the mule to a halt outside the general store. He helped Mia down with the same careful courtesy he had shown at their wedding, seemingly deaf to the snickers that followed them inside. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The store's familiar scents of leather, coffee, and tobacco wrapped around them. Daniel moved purposefully through the aisles, selecting what they needed: a new saw blade, 2 sacks of flour, soap, and sugar. His movements were precise and unhurried, paying no mind to the sideways glances and whispered comments that followed them. When they reached the counter, Mia drew out the purse containing her land rental money. The storekeeper's eyebrows shot up as she counted out the coins. Clearly, he hadn't expected her to have such means. His attitude shifted subtly, becoming more attentive as he wrapped their purchases. Through the store window, Mia noticed a man in a fine suit watching their transaction with keen interest. As they stepped outside, he approached, his manner smooth as polished brass. "Miss Yoder, or should I say Mrs. Lapp now?" The railroad man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I couldn't help but notice you seem well situated. Your uncle's property, it's quite extensive, isn't it? The railroad would be very interested in—" "We owe no answers here," Daniel interrupted quietly but firmly, stepping between Mia and the railroad man. Though his voice remained level, there was steel beneath the words. The railroad man's smile tightened. "Now, see here. Good day to you," Daniel said, helping Mia back into the wagon. He loaded their supplies efficiently, his movements calm but deliberate. As they drove away, Mia's hands twisted in her lap. "They won't let me keep it, will they?" she whispered. "The land's been in my family since before I was born, but they'll find a way to take it." Daniel clicked softly to the mule before answering. "What is yours lawfully must be defended righteously," he said with quiet conviction. "Your uncle left you that land fair and square. No man has the right to take what isn't his." The rest of the ride passed in thoughtful silence. When they reached home, Mia began unpacking their supplies, and almost without realizing it, she started to sing. It was an old hymn about standing firm in troubled times, and her rich voice filled the cabin with its gentle strength. Daniel paused in his work, listening as she sang. The melody seemed to chase away some of the morning's shadows, bringing light back to her eyes. He noticed her shoulders straightening, her movements becoming more sure as the song continued. But while Mia's voice rose clear and strong in their cabin, back in town a different sort of music clicked out its message on the telegraph wire. The operator's eyes widened as he decoded the incoming message. Within hours, word spread through town like wildfire. The railroad had announced plans for new tracks that would cut straight through Mia Yoda's inherited land. The telegraph paper crackled in the operator's hands as he posted the news outside his office. Townspeople gathered to read it, their faces a mix of excitement and concern. The railroad was coming, bringing progress and prosperity. But at what cost to their neighbors? In their cabin, unaware of this new development, Mia continued sorting their purchases, her song carrying across the autumn air. The sun slanted golden through the windows, catching dust motes that danced in its beams, while outside the wind stirred through prairie grass that might soon feel the rumble of approaching trains. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, with frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. Daniel hitched the wagon early, knowing church started at 9 o'clock sharp. Mia emerged from the cabin wearing her best dress, a dark blue cotton she'd carefully pressed the night before. The church bells were already ringing as they approached town, their bronze voices carrying across the morning air. Daniel helped Mia down from the wagon, her hand trembling slightly in his. Together they climbed the wooden steps, the boards creaking beneath their feet. Inside, the little church was packed full, every pew occupied. As they made their way down the aisle, the usual Sunday morning greetings fell silent. Instead, whispers followed in their wake, louder than before. "There they are. Railroads coming through. That land of hers." Mia kept her eyes forward, but Daniel felt her fingers tighten on his arm. They found seats near the back, where Mia tried to make herself smaller against the weight of stairs. The familiar smell of wood polish and well-worn hymnals surrounded them as the service began. After the final hymn, while folks filed out into the sunshine, Preacher Matthews caught Daniel's sleeve. "Brother Lapp, might I have a word?" His tone was friendly, but something in his eyes made Daniel wary. "Of course," Daniel replied, following him to his office while Mia waited by the wagon. The preacher's study was small but neat, with a well-worn Bible open on the desk. "Daniel," he began, his voice carrying forced warmth. "You're new here, so perhaps you don't understand how important progress is to our little town. The railroad, it could bring such prosperity." Daniel stood quietly, his hands folded before him. "Surely you can see that holding on to that land, well, it's not just about you and your wife anymore. The whole town's future is at stake." The preacher leaned forward. "The railroad pays fair prices. More than fair, really. A man's word before God is sacred." Daniel replied softly. "The land is Mia's inheritance, given in trust. God's law commands honesty in all dealings." The preacher's friendly mask slipped slightly. "Now see here. Thank you for your concern," Daniel said firmly. "Good day to you." Throughout the afternoon, neighbors began appearing at their cabin door. Some, like Widow Thompson, brought fresh-baked bread and sympathy. Others came with thinly veiled threats about doing what's right for the town. By supper time, Mia's shoulders were slumped with exhaustion. She moved heavily around their small kitchen, barely touching her food. "Maybe they're right," she whispered. "My size, this land, I'm nothing but a burden to everyone." Daniel set down his fork. "No," he said, his quiet voice firm with conviction. "You are my wife. Your inheritance is righteous. You do not stand alone in this." Tears welled in Mia's eyes. "But what if they turn violent? The railroad men, they've done it before in other towns, burning barns, poisoned wells." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Then, bowing his head, he prayed aloud. "Lord, grant us courage to stand firm in your truth. Let our hearts not falter in the face of fear. Guide our steps in righteousness." After the dishes were cleared, peace settled over their cabin like a warm blanket. But elsewhere, in the back room of the saloon, other plans were taking shape. The railroad men sat with Preacher Matthews, glasses of whiskey between them, mapping out strategies to break the couple's resistance. "The Amish man's weak spot is his faith," one agent said, tapping the table for emphasis. "We can use that." The preacher nodded slowly, though something in his expression suggested discomfort with the path ahead. Back in their cabin, Daniel sat at the rough-hewn table, a lamp casting warm light across its surface. In his neat hand, he carefully copied verses into a small leather book. Words of strength, of standing firm, of God's protection in times of trial. The scratch of his pen was the only sound besides the crackling hearth. Mia watched him from her rocking chair, her mending forgotten in her lap. The lamplight caught his steady profile, illuminating the quiet determination in his features. For the first time, she truly saw the depth of his faith, not just in words or prayer, but in the way he faced each challenge with unwavering calm. This was a different kind of strength than the railroad men possessed with all their money and influence. This was something that couldn't be bought or threatened away. Looking at her husband's bowed head as he worked, Mia felt something shift inside her heart. Perhaps his faith really could prove stronger than all the town's scorn and pressure combined. The lamp burned low as Daniel continued his careful work, each verse a foundation stone being laid for the trials that lay ahead. Outside their window, coyotes called in the distance, their voices rising lonely and wild against the star-filled sky. The days flowed like the creek behind their cabin, steady and sure. Each morning brought new rhythms as Daniel and Mia learned to move together in the small space they now shared. The autumn air grew crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke as they settled into married life. Mia discovered she loved the quiet moments best. While kneading bread dough, she watched Daniel through the window as he mended fences, his steady hands working with careful precision. The soft thump of dough against wood matched his hammer strikes, creating an oddly peaceful melody. One morning, Daniel knocked over the milk pail while reaching for tools. The precious white liquid spread across the cabin floor like a lake. He stood frozen, expecting reproach, but Mia surprised them both by laughing, a bright, clear sound that filled the cabin. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel's own chuckle joined hers. Together they mopped up the spill, their shoulders bumping as they worked, sharing shy smiles over their clumsiness. They fell into an easy pattern with chores. Daniel taught Mia to feed the chickens just so, while she showed him her mother's method for folding sheets. Their hands would sometimes brush as they passed tools or dishes, sending quiet sparks through both their hearts. One golden afternoon, Mia hung laundry on the line, the sheets billowing like sails in the mountain breeze. Without thinking, she began to sing, an old hymn about God's faithfulness. Her voice soared pure and strong across the meadow, floating on the wind like a dove. Sarah Jenkins, riding past on her way to town, pulled her horse to a stop. The melody wrapped around her like sunshine, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. That evening at the general store, she couldn't help but tell others about the beautiful voice she'd heard coming from the Lapp homestead. Word spread quickly through the small community. More neighbors found reasons to pass by, hoping to catch the sound of Mia's singing. Each time someone smiled or waved, Mia felt a small knot of fear inside her loosen. Daniel noticed how his wife's shoulders straightened when she sang. One evening, he disappeared into his workshop after supper. The next day, he presented her with a small wooden stool, smoothly sanded and sturdy. "For sitting outside," he explained softly. "When you want to sing." Mia ran her hands over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. That evening, she sat on her new perch as the sun painted the mountains gold. Her voice joined the evening birds, filling the cooling air with praise. These sunset concerts became their special time. Daniel would finish his chores, then sit on the cabin steps, whittling or mending harness while Mia sang. Sometimes he hummed along, his deep voice a gentle foundation beneath her clear tones. But peace had its shadows. Daniel couldn't miss the strange men who rode along their fence lines, stopping to peer through brass instruments on tripods. They made marks in leather-bound notebooks and spoke in low voices. Though they never approached the cabin, their presence lay heavy on Daniel's mind. He kept these worries from Mia, not wanting to dim her growing confidence. But each night he checked his rifle before setting it by the door. The weapon troubled his conscience, yet his vows to protect his wife weighed equally heavy. One Saturday evening, as they sat together after supper, Daniel set down his coffee cup. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Perhaps we should invite the neighbors for a hymn sing next week. Show them we want to be good neighbors, despite differences." Mia's hands trembled slightly as she folded her dishcloth. "All of them? Even the ones who... even those?" Daniel nodded. "Sometimes the best way to overcome unkindness is with fellowship." Mia touched her throat uncertainly. "I don't know if I can sing in front of so many." Daniel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Your voice is a gift from God. Sharing it might help build bridges we sorely need." After a long moment, Mia squared her shoulders and nodded. "Then we'll try." They spent the evening planning what hymns to sing, how many benches they'd need, what refreshments to serve. Daniel would build simple wooden benches, while Mia would bake her mother's special cinnamon bread. As they worked, their small homestead began to feel different. No longer just a refuge from town scorn, it was becoming something more, a place where beauty and fellowship might flourish, where Mia's gift could shine forth and touch hearts. Like a lantern in gathering dusk, their home stood as a beacon of hope, even as unseen shadows crept closer to their boundaries. The week before the hymn sing bustled with preparation. Mia rose before dawn each morning, her hands dusted white with flour as she kneaded dough for her mother's special cinnamon bread. The cabin filled with sweet aromas as she baked pie after pie, apple, berry, and peach, until every flat surface held cooling treats. Daniel spent his days helping neighbor Thomas Miller haul wooden benches across the meadow in his wagon. The borrowed seats would give their guests proper places to rest during the singing. Between trips, he swept the yard clean and arranged the benches in neat rows, facing the cabin's open door. "You reckon folks will really come?" Mia asked softly as she arranged her pies on the kitchen shelf that final afternoon. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened each dish. Daniel paused in his work of filling the oil lamps. "They'll come," he said with quiet certainty. "Music has a way of drawing people together." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in soft golds and pinks, the first wagon rattled up their drive. The Miller family arrived early, bringing extra cups and plates. Soon more families followed. The Petersons with their 5 children, the widow Jenkins, even some townsfolk they barely knew. Mia stood in the doorway, wringing her apron between nervous fingers as she welcomed each arrival. Some guests shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, while others offered hesitant smiles. The children, free from adult prejudices, ran playing through the yard. Daniel lit the lamps as dusk deepened, their warm glow spilling through the open door and windows. The cabin seemed to expand somehow, embracing all who entered. Neighbors who had never visited before looked around with surprised appreciation at the neat, cozy space. When everyone had settled on the benches, Mia stepped forward. Her voice quavered as she suggested they begin with "Amazing Grace." The first notes came out soft and uncertain, but as others joined in, her confidence grew. By the second verse, her clear soprano lifted above the other voices like a dove soaring into sunlight. The singing paused as people stared in wonder. Even those who had come expecting to mock sat silent, their faces softened by surprise. Mia's voice filled every corner of the cabin with pure, sweet tones that seemed to touch something deep in each listener's heart. Little Sally Peterson edged closer to Mia's skirts, looking up with shining eyes. "Teach us another one?" she pleaded. Soon a cluster of children gathered around, eager to learn. Mia's face glowed as she led them through "This Little Light of Mine," her hands moving gracefully to guide their young voices. Daniel watched from his place by the door, his heart swelling with pride. This was his wife, not the burden others had claimed, but a precious gift from God, touching hearts with her music. He saw the same realization dawn on their neighbors' faces as Mia's voice soared through hymn after hymn. Between songs, folks helped themselves to Mia's pies and cinnamon bread, exclaiming over their goodness. Conversation flowed more easily now, warmed by shared music and food. Even Mrs. Turner, who had once spread unkind gossip about Mia in town, was seen wiping tears from her eyes during "In the Garden." As the evening drew to a close, Preacher Roberts led them in prayer. His words spoke of community and God's love for all his children. Heads bowed together in the lamplight, united in a moment of perfect peace. The yard filled with the creak of wagon wheels and calls of goodbye as families departed. "Such a lovely evening," Mrs. Jenkins said warmly, clasping Mia's hand. "We must do this again soon." "Never knew we had such a voice among us," Mr. Peterson added, helping his sleepy children into their wagon. "Makes a body think twice about judging too quick." Daniel stood beside Mia in the doorway, acknowledging each farewell with a nod. But his keen eyes caught movement in the darkness beyond their yard. There, just within the tree line, shadows shifted that had nothing to do with wind in the branches. He recognized the distinctive shape of a railroad man's hat. After closing the door on the last goodbye, Daniel helped Mia clear away cups and plates. Their hearts were full with the evening's success, but his ears stayed sharp for sounds beyond their walls. As they prepared for bed, he heard it, the distant thunk of axes biting into wood, followed by low voices speaking in angry mutters. Daniel lay awake long after Mia had fallen asleep, his mind turning over what those sounds might mean. Their evening of joy had been sweet indeed, but tomorrow might bring bitter trials. He kept his eyes open, watching moonlight creep across the cabin floor, ready for whatever the dawn might bring. The peace from the hymn-sing lasted only 3 days before violence shattered their world. In the depths of night, Daniel woke to an acrid smell creeping under their cabin door. His eyes flew open, heart pounding as he recognized the scent of burning hay. "Mia, wake up!" he called sharply, already pulling on his boots. She stirred from their bed as he rushed to the window. Outside, orange flames licked the night sky where their barn stood. Then a terrifying thought struck him. Little Joseph Miller, age 8, had begged to sleep in their hayloft after spending the afternoon helping with chores. Daniel's blood ran cold as a child's scream pierced the night. Before he could move, Mia bolted past him in her nightgown, running toward the inferno. "Joseph!" she cried out. Daniel raced after her, but she had already disappeared into the barn's smoke-filled entrance. "Mia!" "No!" Daniel's voice cracked with fear. The heat pushed him back as flames consumed the dry hay. Wood beams crackled overhead, threatening to collapse. Endless seconds ticked by as he stood helpless, torn between his wife and the fire's fury. Then Mia stumbled out, clutching Joseph to her chest. Her nightgown was smoking, her right arm angry red with burns. She managed 3 steps before her legs gave way. Daniel caught them both as they fell. "The child!" she gasped, her voice rough with smoke. "Take him!" Daniel lifted Joseph, who coughed but seemed otherwise unharmed. By now the commotion had roused their nearest neighbors. Wagons thundered up the drive as men shouted and women ran with buckets. "Form a line!" Thomas Miller bellowed, taking charge of the bucket brigade. He hugged his son Joseph close before passing him to his mother's trembling arms. Then he joined the desperate fight against the flames. But it was too late. The fire had too strong a hold. Daniel could only watch, supporting Mia's weakened form, as their barn became a tower of flame. Tools, hay, feed for winter, all vanished in the blaze. The bucket line managed to keep the fire from spreading to nearby trees, but nothing could save the barn itself. By dawn's first grey light, only smoking ruins remained. The sun rose over blackened beams and ash where their barn had stood. Neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering words like railroad and warning. But no one had seen who set the fire, and proof lay burned to nothing in the ruins. Mia lay pale in their bed, her burned arm wrapped in clean linen strips supplied by Mrs. Miller. Every few minutes she winced with pain, though she tried to hide it. Daniel knelt beside her, gently dabbing her forehead with a cool cloth. His hands shook with suppressed rage. "We know who did this," he said, his voice tight. The railroad men had been watching that night of the hymn sing. Now they had shown just how far they would go to force Mia's land from her. "Daniel." Mia's good hand caught his wrist. "Your vow. Remember your vow of peace." He looked down at her singed hair, her pain-lined face. The urge to find those responsible and make them pay burned in his chest. Yet his wife's quiet words reminded him of promises made before God. "They could have killed Joseph," he whispered. "They could have killed you." "But they didn't." Mia's voice was weak but firm. "God protected us. We must trust him still." Evening painted the cabin walls gold as Daniel knelt beside their bed to pray. His words came hard at first, choked by fear for his wife and anger at their enemies. But as he spoke, asking for guidance and protection, some of the day's terrible tension began to ease. Mia's breathing grew steady as she drifted to sleep. Daniel remained kneeling, watching her face in the fading light. Their marriage, born of a cruel bet, had become something precious and true. Now it had also become dangerous. The railroad wanted her land, and they had shown they would stop at nothing to get it. Love and fear warred in his heart as he watched his sleeping wife. The cost of standing firm was already heavy. How much heavier might it become? Daniel bowed his head again, praying for strength to keep his vow of peace while protecting all he held dear. Morning painted the hills in pale gold, but Daniel found no beauty in the dawn. Smoke still curled from the blackened ruins of their barn, a bitter reminder of last night's violence. He stood among the wreckage, trying to salvage what he could. His shoulders ached as he lifted charred boards, searching for anything worth saving. The smell of ash filled his nose as he worked. Each piece of burned lumber felt like a weight on his soul. Near the barn's former entrance, he found the remains of his favorite hammer, its wooden handle consumed by flame. Daniel turned the metal head in his hands, wrestling with thoughts he'd never faced before. "Perhaps they're right," he said aloud, his voice rough. "Maybe peaceful ways make us weak. How can we stand against such evil without fighting back?" The morning breeze carried no answer, only the acrid scent of destruction. Inside the cabin, Mia rested in their bed, her burned arm carefully bandaged. Though the doctor had said she would heal, the sight of her injury stirred something dangerous in Daniel's heart. When he stepped inside to check on her, Mia was awake. Despite her pain, her eyes held steady wisdom. "I see the trouble in your face, husband," she said softly. Daniel sank into the chair beside her. "How can we follow Christ's teaching when evil men try to destroy us?" "When they hurt you," Mia's good hand found his. "The same way he did," she whispered, "by trusting God's justice more than our own strength." Her words pierced his anger like sunlight through storm clouds. Daniel knelt beside their hearth, tears falling silently into his calloused hands as he prayed. The familiar words felt different now, weighted with deeper meaning. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. A knock at the door interrupted his prayer. Thomas Miller stood there, his face grim. "Daniel, this can't stand," he said, stepping inside. "We'll help you fight these railroad men. No one burns a barn with my boy inside and walks away." Daniel rose slowly, wiping his eyes. "I thank you, friend. But I cannot meet violence with violence. They'll take everything if you don't stop them." "Perhaps." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "But I will not forsake my vows before God." Miller left, shaking his head, muttering about foolishness. But as evening settled over their homestead, peace began to replace Daniel's despair. Mia's soft humming filled their cabin. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, her voice carrying hope despite her pain. As Daniel tended her burns with gentle hands, he couldn't hold back his gratitude. "You saved more than Joseph last night," he whispered. "You saved my faith when I doubted. Thank you, wife." Mia's eyes shone in the lamplight. "God gave me strength I never knew I had," she said. "He will give you strength too." They tried to sleep, but rest came hard. Daniel lay awake, listening to wolves howl in the distance. Their cries seemed to echo the storm of emotions in his heart. Yet as he watched Mia's peaceful breathing, clarity slowly came. He would face the railroad men, yes, but with law and truth, not fists and fury. Rising quietly, Daniel lit a lamp and began writing a careful letter to the county clerk. He detailed Mia's legal ownership of her uncle's land, requesting official copies of all deeds and documents. Each scratch of his pen felt like a step toward justice. The railroad men might have wealth and power, but they would have to face the light of public record. Daniel wrote until his hands cramped, determined to build a wall of truth around what was rightfully theirs. The wolf's song faded as night deepened. Daniel sealed his letter and placed it carefully aside for morning posting. He knew confrontation lay ahead, but now he could face it with clean conscience and clear purpose. Climbing back into bed, he felt Mia stir. "All will be well," she murmured sleepily. "Yes," he answered, believing it at last. "All will be well." Word of the barn burning spread through town like wildfire. The story of Mia rushing into flames to save young Joseph Miller touched hearts that had been cold toward her. By noon, Daniel had posted notices calling for a town gathering at the church hall that evening. As the sun began to set, wagons and riders converged on the white-painted church. Lanterns flickered in the windows as townsfolk filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of the crowd. Daniel stood at the front, his plain black coat dusty from the day's work. Mia sat beside him, her burned arm carefully bandaged, her eyes downcast but her back straight. The murmuring crowd hushed as Daniel unfolded a weathered document. His clear voice carried to every corner of the room. "This is the legal deed to 160 acres of land," he began, "signed and witnessed 5 years ago, transferring ownership from Theodore Yoder to his niece, Mia Yoder, now my wife." He held the paper high so all could see the official seal. "The land is hers by law and right. We seek only fairness under God's eyes and man's law alike." Whispers rustled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Near the back, several railroad men stood with arms crossed, their faces dark with displeasure. Preacher Matthews rose from his seat, his voice sharp with authority. "Now, friends, we must consider the greater good. The railroad means progress, jobs, commerce, connection to the wider world. We cannot let one piece of land hinder God's plan for our town's growth." More murmurs filled the room, but now they carried a different tone. Several people turned to look at Mia, remembering her sweet voice leading hymns in their homes. Martha Wilson spoke up from the third row. "That land's been in the Yoder family near 20 years. Theodore worked it honest, and now it's Mia's by right. And she nearly gave her life saving my Joseph," Thomas Miller added, standing. while them railroad men were setting fire to an innocent family's barn. His words caused a stir, though he had no proof to back the accusation. The railroad agents in the back began to scowl, seeing the mood of the crowd shift. One of them stepped forward, hand raised to speak, but Daniel's calm voice cut through the tension. "We seek no quarrel," he said firmly. "Only justice and mercy for all. The same law that protects the railroad's rights must protect the widow and the farmer too. This is God's way." Mia rose slowly beside him, trembling slightly. Without introduction, she lifted her voice in song. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." The single verse filled the church hall, her pure tone carrying all the pain and hope of recent days. The room fell silent, caught in the spell of her gift. Several women wiped tears from their eyes. Even the railroad men stood uncomfortably, unable to match their schemes against such innocent grace. When the last note faded, old Sam Tucker cleared his throat. "Reckon I'll stand with Daniel and Mia on this. Ain't right to take what's lawfully theirs." "Same here," called another voice, then another. Support began, building like a wave, though some still held back, torn between conscience and commerce. The meeting broke up with no clear resolution, but the tide had turned. As people filed out into the night, many stopped to shake Daniel's hand or pat Mia's shoulder gently. The railroad men departed quickly, their plans clearly frustrated, but not abandoned. Daniel helped Mia into their wagon, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the chill air. As they rode home beneath the stars, she slipped her good hand into his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for defending our land. My land so well." Daniel squeezed her fingers gently. The night air was cold around them, but their clasped hands were warm with shared purpose and growing love. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as they made their way home, two hearts stronger together than either had been alone. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Daniel's homestead when hoofbeats approached. Two railroad agents rode up, their horses' flanks lathered with sweat. Daniel set down his axe and stood straight, watching them dismount. Mia appeared in the cabin doorway, her bandaged arm held close. The taller agent, Maxwell, adjusted his vest and spat in the dust. "Listen here, Lap. We're done playing nice. Railroad's giving you one last chance to sell that land fair and square." His companion, a wiry man with a thin mustache, fingered his gun belt. "Hate to see more accidents happen to such a fine place." Daniel's face remained calm, though his jaw tightened slightly. "The deed is clear," he said quietly. "This land belongs to my wife through her uncle's will. We cannot sell what God has placed in our care." Mia stepped forward to stand beside him. Her face was pale, but her voice stayed steady. "The land stays in the family." Maxwell's face darkened. "Family?" He laughed harshly. "That what you call this joke of a marriage? Everyone knows it started as a bet." "The vow was real," Daniel answered, "before God and man alike." "Railroad always gets its way," the wiry man snarled. "One way or another. Barns ain't the only things that burn." Daniel met their gaze without flinching. "Then you best do what you must." "We will do the same." The agents mounted up, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Maxwell pointed a finger at them. "You're going to regret this, both of you." Mark my words. After they rode away, Daniel immediately went to work. He gathered his tools and began reinforcing the cabin's wooden shutters, adding extra crossbars. Inside, he moved their valuable papers and Mia's mother's Bible to a metal box, ready to grab if needed. Night fell early, as it often did in the Colorado autumn. After a simple supper of cornbread and beans, Mia sat by the hearth, trying to mend, but her hands shaking too much to hold the needle steady. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks. "I keep thinking about the barn," she whispered. "What if next time?" Daniel knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "God sees all," he said softly. "His justice comes in his time, Not ours. We must trust and stay faithful. But why must faith cost so much? Because that is how we prove its worth. He brushed a tear from her cheek. You are braver than you know, Mia. In town, word of the railroad's ultimatum spread quickly. Some folks whispered that the company might abandon their planned route entirely if they couldn't secure Mia's land. The alternate path would bypass the town completely, taking commerce and opportunity with it. Preacher Matthews seized on these fears. After Sunday service, he thundered about progress being God's will and stubborn pride being sin. His words struck home with some, but others remembered Mia's hymns and her rescue of young Joseph. That very afternoon, Martha Wilson drove her wagon up to Daniel's cabin, loaded with preserves and flour. Town's choosing sides, she told them. But you ain't alone. More help arrived through the week. Thomas Miller brought fresh-cut lumber to help rebuild the barn. The Cooper sisters delivered a quilt they'd sewn for Mia. Even old Sam Tucker rode out with his sons to help Daniel dig a new well, deeper than the first. Saturday evening found Daniel and Mia sharing a quiet supper. The cabin was snug against the autumn chill, with new shutters tight and a pot of stew bubbling on the hearth. They ate slowly, savoring the peace of the moment while knowing it might not last. I never thought I'd find such friendship here, Mia said softly, breaking the silence. After so many years of mockery. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. You showed them your true heart. That's worth more than any railroad's gold. She squeezed his fingers, remembering how strange it had felt when he'd first slipped that brass ring onto her hand. Now his touch brought comfort and strength. What had begun as a cruel bet had grown into something true and deep, tempered by shared trials. Outside, the wind whispered through prairie grass. Inside, two hearts beat stronger for being together. The railroad's threats still loomed, and the preacher's opposition continued to divide the town. But Daniel and Mia had found something neither had expected, not just love, but a community willing to stand beside them for what was right. Sunday dawned crisp and clear, the church bell ringing across the valley. Daniel helped Mia down from their wagon, her arm still tender from the burn. Together they walked up the wooden steps, feeling every eye upon them. Inside, the church was packed full, with townsfolk squeezed tight in the pine pews. The railroad agents lounged near the back, their very presence making the air heavy with tension. Preacher Matthews stood at his pulpit, face stern beneath grey whiskers. Progress is God's will for this territory, he thundered, bringing his fist down. We cannot let stubborn pride halt the march of civilization. The railroad brings prosperity to all. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Mia sat very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel remained steady beside her, his face calm despite the preacher's words. But then something unexpected happened. Old Thomas Wilson, an elder who had lived in the valley 40 years, rose slowly to his feet. His voice, though weathered, carried clearly through the church. I've known Mia since she was a girl, he declared. Known her uncle's land longer still. That deed is rightful and true. He turned to face the congregation. And who among us hasn't been blessed by her singing? Are we to cast aside God's gifts for mere profit? A moment of silence followed. Then Martha Cooper stood up. My girls love her hymns. They want to learn from her. She saved my Joseph from that fire, Sam Tucker added, rising as well, while others just watched. One by one, more voices joined in support. Even the storekeeper, who had once whispered cruel words, spoke up about Mia's quiet dignity and Daniel's honest dealings. The railroad agents shifted uneasily, seeing the tide turn. Without the town's backing, they could not risk further violence. It would only bring the law down upon them. Maxwell stood abruptly, his face dark with anger. You're all fools, he spat. But fine. There are other routes west. He stormed out, his companion following quickly. Relief flooded the church. Daniel squeezed Mia's hand, feeling her tremble with emotion. After the service, neighbors crowded around them warmly. Women asked when Mia might start teaching hymns to their children. Men offered help rebuilding the barn. We were wrong to judge, the storekeeper admitted gruffly. Both of you showed us better ways." Driving home that evening, the sunset painted the hills gold. Behind their cabin, the burned barn's skeleton stood as a reminder of darker days. But as Daniel helped Mia down from the wagon, hope felt stronger than any shadow. Inside, they knelt together by the hearth. Daniel's prayer was simple but heartfelt, thanking God for deliverance and the power of mercy to change hearts. Mia's quiet "Amen" carried all the music of her hymns. The autumn breeze carried the sound of hammering and laughter across the meadow. 6 weeks had passed since that fateful Sunday service, and the new barn was rising steadily from the ashes of the old. Neighbors had gathered from all around, their sleeves rolled up as they worked together under the Colorado sun. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, pausing to watch the scene before him. The barn frame stood twice as strong as before, with thick beams and sturdy posts. Sam Tucker and his boys had brought extra lumber, while Thomas Wilson had contributed his expertise in barn raising. Even the storekeeper had sent nails and hardware at no charge. Near the edge of the meadow, Mia sat on her singing stool, surrounded by a circle of children. Her arm had healed clean, leaving only a faint scar to remind them of that terrifying night. Her voice lifted clear and sweet as she taught the little ones a new hymn, their small voices joining hers in harmony. "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord." They sang, the words floating across to where the men worked. Some of the workers hummed along, their hammers keeping time with the melody. Daniel's heart swelled as he watched his wife. Gone was the timid woman who had once hidden from cruel stares. In her place sat someone transformed by love and acceptance, someone who had found her true calling in sharing her gift with others. That evening, after the workers had gone home, Daniel and Mia sat down to supper in their cabin. The lamplight cast a warm glow over their simple meal of bread and stew. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "You are God's gift to me," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I see his wisdom now, in all that has happened." Mia's eyes glistened. Who would have thought that cruel bet would lead to such blessing? Later that night, they joined the whole town at the church hall. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The pews were packed full, but this time there were no whispers, no mocking glances. When Mia stood to sing, the room fell silent in anticipation. Her voice rose pure and strong, filling every corner of the hall. She sang of grace, of redemption, of love that overcomes all barriers. The townsfolk sat transfixed, many wiping tears from their eyes. Even Preacher Matthews nodded approvingly, his earlier opposition forgotten. During the thunderous applause that followed, Daniel leaned close to his wife's ear. "What began as a jest has become my greatest blessing," he whispered, his voice tender with pride and love. The walk home under the stars was peaceful, their fingers intertwined. The night air carried the scent of pine and late summer flowers. Around them, crickets chirped their evening song, a gentle accompaniment to their footsteps. They paused at the top of the hill overlooking their homestead. The new barn's silhouette stood strong against the starlit sky, not just a building, but a symbol of community restored, of cruelty transformed by mercy into grace. Looking at his wife's face in the starlight, Daniel saw all the beauty that others had once been blind to. Their marriage, born of a cruel wager, had blossomed into something sacred and true. Through faith, dignity, and unwavering love, they had not just survived. They had helped heal a broken community. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.